While Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were the first members of the British royal family to make Frogmore Cottage their home, the Windsor property has been in use since the late 18th century. It was built as a retreat for a queen consort and her daughters, but later became a home to a beloved aide, a nursery for future kings and a place of refuge for an almost destitute royal. However, the Duke and Duchess are not the first to be evicted from their home, with figures of the past also being forced to vacate the comforts of their royal residence. Here, Express.co.uk takes a look back at previous royal evictions and how they may foreshadow the Sussexes' fate. Scrubbed from history in October 1893, Queen Victoria offered Frogmore Cottage to her Indian secretary, Abdul Karim, who had served the monarch for 6 years and become her firm favourite. Victoria developed a maternal affection for her secretary, whom she called Moonchi, and often signed off her letters to him as your affectionate mother, VRI, or your truly devoted and fond-loving mother, VRI. Victoria had allowed Abdul to decorate the home how he liked, according to Shrabani Basu, whose 2010 book Victoria and Abdul, The True Story of the Queen's Closest Confidant inspired the film starring Judi Dench in 2017. I imagine it was very beautiful and he filled it with beautiful objects he was given by European royalty, she said. I'm sure it was full of exotic things. Ms. Basu added, she would bring European royalty with her to visit. They would often go there for tea and meet the Moonchi and his wife. Her diaries are full of mentions of meeting the Moonchi and his wife for tea. Harry and Meghan give an updated timeline to vacate Frogmore Cottage. Long after coronation, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have reportedly been given an updated timeline to give up the keys to their royal home, Frogmore Cottage, with the couple expected to be given a new palace home by King Charles. While the Sussexes must leave their previous residence within weeks, the America-based couple could be offered Prince Andrew's old suite in Buckingham Palace. Abdul lived in the cottage with his family for less than 10 years. While he shared a close bond with the Queen, he did not have a good relationship with the rest of the royal family. And when Victoria died in 1901, his days in the Crown Estate property became numbered. Abdul was among the principal mourners at the Queen's Windsor Castle funeral and, at the request of the late monarch, was involved in the procession and was the last person to view Victoria's body before her casket was closed. But just hours after the funeral, Victoria's son, the newly crowned King Edward VII, demanded that any letters between the two found on the premises be burned. According to the Smithsonian, Edward VII sent guards into the cottage Karim shared with his wife, seizing all letters from the Queen and burning them on the spot. They instructed Karim to return to India immediately, without fanfare or farewell. Ms. Basu said, it was early morning and just hours after her funeral. Queen Alexandra and Princess Beatrice were standing there and a lot of guards, and they ordered a raid on his house and all of his letters were taken and burned. It was a heartbreaking moment in Abdul's life. It was a bit of dark history. Soon after, Abdul was evicted from Frogmore Cottage and deported back to India. Royal historian Marlene Koenig told Express.co.uk, Edward VII kicked the Moonchi Abdul Karim out of Frogmore Cottage soon after Victoria died. The royal family then scrubbed his existence from history, with Beatrice erasing all reference to Karim in the Queen's journals. It was not until 100 years later, when Ms. Basu noticed several paintings and a bust of Abdul during a tour of Osborne House, that the truth of Victoria's relationship with her Moonshee was discovered. Royal refuge in 1925, after years of playing host to members of the royal family and their acquaintances, Frogmore Cottage welcomed a new tenant. King George V had offered the home to his first cousin, Grand Duchess Xenia of Russia, who had fled her home country after the execution of her brother Tsar Nicholas II and his family. Nicholas was the last emperor of Russia and Xenia was one of his two surviving sisters. Having left Russia in 1919, the Grand Duchess's financial situation was dire, prompting King George to offer her a grace and favour home. She sent a letter to her cousin, expressing her gratitude for his kindness. "Really, Georgie, it is too good and kind of you." Xenia lived at the cottage which, at the time, had around 23 rooms but only one toilet, with several of her sons and their families. When the home became too crowded, the family were offered Home Park Cottage, which stood opposite the family's home, as an overflow property. In 1929, a Ministry of Works official found that the cottage was in deplorable condition, as the house had not been touched for several years. Subsequent refurbishments were paid for by the king, including the installation of hot water pipes and a second-hand gas stove from the castle. By 1934, 21 people were living in Frogmore Cottage. After a plan to relocate the family was vetoed, George paid for another wing to be added to the home, which would include 3 bedrooms and another bathroom. "Don't miss. Lilibet's christening snub will be felt later," says Lady Hervey. Latest poll: should the royal family have gone to Lilibet's christening? Poll: Fergie shuts down when asked about Harry and Meghan, claims, "Insight, despite their close proximity to the British royals, Xenia and her family were distant from the Windsors." And following the death of George V in 1936, his son decided that he wanted to retain the cottage for the immediate royal family. The newly appointed King Edward VIII sent word to Grand Duchess Xenia. Ms. Koenig said, Edward VIII kicked her and her family out because he had plans, that never came to fruition, for some sort of accommodation for the British royals. He offered her Wilderness House, at Hampton Court, another grace and favour home. Queen Maud of Norway, the late king's sister, seemed relieved to hear Xenia was leaving Windsor. In a letter to Queen Mary, she wrote Hampton Court will be further away for all of her tiresome family. Xenia and her family moved to their new home in November 1936. Wilderness House was where Xenia died in 1960, said Ms. Koenig. Cost-cutting upset. While the royal family has several properties across the country, some members own their own homes which are paid for out of their own pocket. In 1938, the late Duke and Duchess of Gloucester bought Barnwell Manor, a Grade II listed property in Northamptonshire. Prince Henry, Duke of Gloucester, who was the younger brother of King George VI, and his wife Princess Alice raised their family in the 16th-century house, making it the childhood home of Prince Richard, Duke of Gloucester, and his brother Prince William, who died in 1972. The grand, 40-room manor has a rich history, once granted to the aristocratic Montagu family by Henry VIII and remaining under their ownership for over 370 years. In fact, Henry, in part, bought the home because his wife, daughter of the 7th Duke of Buccleuch, remembered the property from the time it belonged to her grandfather. Following the death of Henry in 1974, Alice remained at the property, alongside Richard, his wife Birgitta, Duchess of Gloucester, and their 3 children. However, in 1995, it was announced that the Gloucesters were vacating the property to live in apartment 1 at Kensington Palace, a move that went against the wishes of Princess Alice. While Richard and his family had been spending most of their time at Kensington Palace, and only travelled to Barnwell on the weekends, Alice had continued to live at the historic manor. Reports at the time claimed Alice, then 93, was upset at the prospect of leaving the home. Richard's private secretary Major Nicholas Barnes said, "This is not an overnight decision, it's basically for financial reasons. The savings will come because the staff around the house will exist no more. There will be no wages to pay anymore." A close aide of the Duke added, "Everyone is upset they are moving out of their family home after 54 years. Ms. Koenig described Barnwell Manor as Alice's beloved home, and explained that, while the princess was not evicted, she had to leave against her will. The Duke and Duchess of Gloucester took his mum, Princess Alice, from her beloved home because he couldn't afford the maintenance, the historian explained. Alice did not want to leave Barnwell, but had to join her son at Kensington Palace while her old home was rented out. She added, "It's not really an eviction, but it's an example of the royal purse not covering all of its members, and their properties. And royals ultimately having to leave their loved homes." Before news of the move emerged, Alice saw her £87,000 annual allowance from the monarch replaced by a discretionary award, a result of a change to the civil list. Meanwhile, the Duke of Gloucester, a working member of the firm, was receiving £175,000 a year. Given their royal duties, Richard and Birgitta were not required to pay rent on their London apartment, but did cover the maintenance of the 4-bed property. They have to pay for their upkeep at Kensington Palace, and when you are trying to maintain 2 homes, it does cause problems, said Major Barnes. Princess Alice was 93 on Christmas Day and she is moving to Kensington Palace, where she has her own rooms, to join her son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren. The farm at Barnwell will still be maintained and they will have very close contacts with the estate. The manor was subsequently rented out and has, in recent years, been occupied by Windsor House Antiques. Now, however, the home is under offer, 5 months after being put on the market for £4.75 million, according to the Savills website. Princess Alice, the Dowager Duchess, died at Kensington Palace in 2004, aged 102. Richard and Birgitta have since moved to a smaller property on the palace grounds. It is understood that they will maintain their connection to Barnwell Manor.
Now